Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us. My name is Alyssa Dias, and on behalf of Staples, we're so excited to bring you today's webinar in partnership with The Lonely Entrepreneur. The topic, how to survive and thrive in a crisis, is so relevant to so many small business owners right now who have a hard job every day, but are now navigating unprecedented challenges related to the pandemic. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of our session, so if you have a question, scan the QR code you see on the screen now, or you can follow the link on the Eventbrite page. You can submit your questions at any point during the broadcast, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can before our time together is up. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Dermer, founder and CEO of The Lonely Entrepreneur. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Staples and all the folks that are taking time out of their busy day to be with us today. We're going to hopefully spend a good part of the hour today providing you with some specific insights. We hear all the time about this idea of pivoting and doing different things, and we're reading the paper every day. And as you're going to get to know, we at The Lonely Entrepreneur went through this in 2008, and hopefully can lend some insight to help you really have a better chance of not just surviving, but also setting yourself up to thrive in the future. So tell you a little bit just quickly about Lonely Entrepreneur. We wake up every day and we have a very simple mission, is really to unlock the potential of entrepreneurs worldwide by turning their passion into success. And as you'll see, turning that passion into success is very much about individual skills. Some of them are tactical skills, some of those are mindsets, but turning passion into success is not a concept. It is, what are the specific skills that you have to develop and implement to have a better chance of success? And obviously that is no more true than in the current crisis that we're undergoing. So just to give you a little bit of insight about The Lonely Entrepreneur, if you could go to the next slide. We faced in 2008 what a lot of people are facing today. I started my career as a corporate attorney in New York City, did mergers and acquisitions, working for a large firm, and left that after 3 years in the early 2000s to start what got to be known as the first company in the United States to reward people for being healthy. It was essentially a loyalty program wrapped around healthcare behaviors. Didn't exist in the early 2000s. So I left the big law firm job for a basement, as we like to say, and basically started this brand new concept. The first 5 years of our company were incredibly lean. Not only did rewards in healthcare not exist, they were offensive. People in the healthcare industry said what I'm sure a lot of our listeners here today hear, which is, we're never going to do that. We're never going to reward people who are healthy. Just basically, we're not paying people to do the things they should be doing. All of us who are entrepreneurs have heard that at one time or another. And we kept going. The first 5 years were very lean. And then from 2006 to 2008, we grew like crazy, venture capital backed. So now in 2008, almost 10 years into it, $60 million in revenue, 500 employees. And we had, as they said, made it and really had defined a new category in healthcare. That lasted not very long, because in October 2008, when the financial crisis hit, our company that it took us 10 years to build basically got cut in half overnight. All of our customers, as you can imagine, were the largest companies in America. And so we had a loyalty platform, a piece of technology wrapped around the different healthcare solutions from big health plans and big employers. In fact, our three biggest customers, for those of you that remember that time, were General Motors, Countrywide Financial, and Washington Mutual. Two of those three don't exist today. In fact, didn't exist about a month into the financial crisis, and General Motors, as we all know, needed a government bailout. So we spent the next 2 or 3 years battling and scrapping and clawing and employing a lot of the techniques we're going to talk about here today. And we're fortunate enough after a couple of years to grow again. And on the other end of the financial crisis, everybody was interested in healthcare, and we got approached by a bunch of investment bankers and got bought. And so it was an amazing story. But the things that we learned during that time really made the difference, and the steps that we took really made the difference. And so if we could just go back to the previous slide just for 1 second. Thank you. One of the things we learned, so many things we learned, we actually, thanks to Staples, put into this thing we call an entrepreneur survival guide that's available to free for everyone compliments of Staples. So if you just go to lonelyentrepreneur.com, there's a big button that says survival guide. Feel free to take advantage of it. And there's the things we're going to talk about here and others. And thanks to Staples, made available free to everybody on this call. So without further ado, let's get a little further into it. So, what is it like in normal times, right? Let's talk a little bit about our journeys as entrepreneurs when things are the norm, right? In a world that we live in, it's hyper competitive. Back in the early 2000s, when I started rewarding people for being healthy, nobody was doing that. We had a couple of years to make it work. And if you had what I felt that we have, frankly, we all feel what we have, which is passion and grit, really to work hard at our passion and a really good idea, that was enough, right? That was enough to be successful as an entrepreneurial venture, right? One example that I give, which we don't talk about anymore, is think about 1-800-Flowers. Back in the 80s, 1-800-Flowers like, oh my God, groundbreaking. You call a number, you get flowers. Imagine if somebody started 1-800-Flowers today. They would be like, who would do that? You just go online, you pick your flowers and you go. So today, even pre-COVID, passion, grit, and a good idea are not enough. You need those just to, as they say in the Disney theme parks, just to get on the ride. Okay, if you don't have those things, you can't even show up. Okay. So the key is, entrepreneurism, okay, I just have passion and good idea. It's not just, hey, I'm going to run into the wall and I'll do it harder than the next person or more often to the next person, which maybe 10 or 15 years ago you could do. If I was willing to do that, I could be successful. You can't just do that. You have to learn how not to run into the wall, right? How to run around the wall, how to go under the wall, right? And what does that mean specifically? It means developing specific skills, right? How do I communicate my sales pitch better? How do I make my website more efficient? How do I do a better job of presenting to investors, right? And that mindset, like I wish that somebody had said to me when I was 20, being an entrepreneur is not a job, it's an identity. And you're going to embark on this journey to be an entrepreneur. The analogy we use all the time is, for those of you listening today who are mothers, how many of you woke up the day after you had your first child and said, I'm great at this mom thing, right? You probably said, wow, I hope I don't just kill this little person that I just gave birth to, right? But you work at it and you get better at it and you learn at it and you're committed to it. The same thing for people that are golfers, right? How many people just show up on a course and are scratch golfers, right? They work at their game. And so this whole notion of developing specific skills. Now, the things we're going to focus on for most of our time together is going to be, okay, well, how do we learn those skills in the midst of a crisis? And as you can probably tell from our previous experience, and it's what led to us creating The Lonely Entrepreneur, is that the amount that we learned in 2000 to 2000 whatever 9 in building a business from nothing to 500 employees was immense, right? I personally learned a ton. What we learned from 2008 to 2011 in the middle of the crisis was like 20 years of learning, because like the way a lot of people feel right now is we all feel like, we used to say back then in 2008, it wasn't that you kind of went to the street and decided, am I going to go left or am I going to go right? You wondered about whether the street was going to be there. And isn't that the way it feels right now? It's not even I have a foundation, whatever. It's like, wait a minute, like I ran a restaurant or I had a graphic design business or I had a workspace or I go down the list and it feels like the floor is not there, right? So when we went through this, we learned a lot, and hopefully we're going to be able to share some of those insights with you. So even though passion and grit and a good idea is not enough, and we do have to be committed to developing these entrepreneurial skills, and that's what gives us a better chance of success, there's one thing I always want us to remember, and that is that we as entrepreneurs, we lack capital, we lack resources, but we do not lack the ability to think differently. Okay. In fact, I think if you took 20 big companies, they would love to have the ability to think differently the way we do as entrepreneurs. Okay. And each of us on this call knows that. They said, I thought of something that's different because we think about things differently. That skill is the cornerstone skill of how do you figure out how to survive and thrive into a crisis. So I know we often feel like, wow, I wish I had a big bank account. Wow, I wish I had 100 employees instead of 4. Right? I wish it wasn't just all me. But don't ever underestimate the fact that we have, the ability to think differently. And that's not everybody. We always kid around that people who aren't entrepreneurs say things like, are you working on Columbus Day? Right. And we all just kind of laugh and we're like, you don't get it. But our ability to take that passion and think differently is cornerstone to a lot of the things that I'm going to say to you. I can tell you what I told my team back in 2008. Even though a 500-person company seems like a decent-sized company, imagine yourself kind of on the beach, reading a magazine and a tsunami's coming, right? The world doesn't care about a 500-person company. Remember, Bear Stearns was collapsing, AIG was collapsing, General Motors was collapsing. The one thing that I knew was that the normal ways were not going to work. If we just lined up and went back to our investors or to a bank or to the normal things were not going to work. So this is what we told our team. We said, don't kill anybody, don't break any laws, but you have to start to go the wrong way down a one-way street. Because if we just line up with everybody else, there's no way that we're going to come out of this because the world doesn't care about a 500-person company, even though it's a decent-sized company, right? We said, when we come to work every day, 2 + 2 is not 4 anymore. Okay, so break those ideas because we're going to need to tap into this last point on the screen, which is the ability to think differently. Okay, so now let's get into foundationally, what does it actually take to first survive, right? To kind of deal with the reality. And I know we're part of the way through it, but in a lot of ways, not really, right? But then also to set yourself up to be successful in the future about what's going forward. So let's get into a little. Next slide, if you want. A quick story. And this is a story about creativity that really, I think, defines how I'd like everybody to think about this. And you guys know, you sit at dinner tables, or maybe not at dinner tables outside your home, but you talk to people and they don't know what it's like to be you. They do not know what it's like to sit in your shoes, right? And so having been there and having such an appreciation for that, how hard it is, you do need to be at your best, right? And I think this story will tell you what that's like. Back in 2008, where things collapsed, a lot of what we did is we rewarded people for being healthy. And one of the ways that we did that is if you worked for a big company like Staples, Staple would have an incentive program that said if you complete a health risk assessment, if you get a biometric screening, if you go to the gym, you could earn rewards. And those rewards were in lots of different forms. But some of them were in the form of gift cards to your favorite retailers, right? I've earned $25 for going to the gym. I get a gift card. Any of you that have worked for big companies, this happens all the time. Well, when our company started to collapse because our customers were collapsing, we had $10 million of liabilities where we basically had to send out gift cards to people. Because of the impact on our customers and our revenue, we had $1 million in cash. Now, I don't know how many of you are math majors, but that math doesn't add up. And so we said, how do we do this? How do we still fulfill our obligations to our customers when we don't have the cash to do it? So we went back to, I'll use Applebee's as an example. We went to Applebee's corporate, where we would buy gift cards for 80 cents on the dollar. So a $100 gift card costs us $80. And we went back to Applebee's and said, listen, Applebee's, there's a big problem here. The economy's collapsing. Not as many people are going out to eat. And how about this? How about you charge us 30 cents for a $100 gift card? Because we're going to put many, many, many more people in your stores and in your restaurants, rather, and we need that. And Applebee's said, yeah, good idea, but not really. So we went back and said, that's not good, because we've got Applebee's and Amazon and Barnes and Noble and retailers all over the place we had the same problem with. So what did we do? Our office was in northern New Jersey. We went down the road, Route 17 in northern New Jersey, and went to the local Applebee's and said, hi, we'd like to buy $100,000 of gift cards from you. And they were like, oh my God, that's great, because the restaurant, the Applebee's store that does the most gift cards, the whole staff goes to Hawaii. And we were like, well, how much do you need to win to do that? And they said last year, the winning restaurant was $40,000. And we're like, we want to buy $100,000 from you, but we want to pay 10 cents, right? And they went in the back, kind of like used car salesman, and went back and said, okay. What we also realized was that when you sell a gift card at Applebee's in New Jersey, that gets shipped across the country to Oregon, and it never goes back to that store. So the store didn't care. So we literally took $10 million and took $1 million and turned it into 10. So we went to Barnes, we went to every single retailer. And when a store said no, we would say, we're just going to go right down the road to the other Applebee's in Northern New Jersey and do the same thing with them. So you can do it or not do it. So we literally turned $1 million into $10 million. Okay. This is the type of stuff that you can't make up. Did we know when we walked into Applebee's it didn't work? It was going to work? Didn't know. But this is the type of creativity that you have to use. So let's get a little bit into some specific things I think that we have to be able to do. Okay. Next slide. First and foremost, this starts with your perspective. Okay. This is tough stuff, what we're dealing with right now. Okay. And somebody that doesn't know what it's like to be you, to think about, how am I going to pay my people? And I've got to let people go. And I've got to make these, like, this is big boys and girls stuff. That's why there should be a superhero called entrepreneur, where we have a big E on our chest, right? Because even pre-COVID, this really requires us to be superheroes. So a couple of things. Number one, don't ever let anybody ever tell you there's not a way. Think about my example of Applebee's, right? You have the entrepreneurial creativity. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't figure out a way. You can. Secondly is, and this is super important, you need to be a wartime CEO. And let me tell you what I mean by that. In normal times, when you become a good leader, and this doesn't matter whether you have 1 employee or 20 employees, wherever you are, when you're a good leader, you're not walking into team meetings and saying, you do this and you do this and you do this. And you're normally going and you're building consensus. You're trying to get everybody to buy in, and you're saying to your team, if you do it well, okay, team member, head of marketing, how would you do it? You own it, take it, and I'll give you feedback. You're guiding, you're building consensus, you're aligning. You don't have the time to do that when these things are going on. You've got to be, as we would say, a wartime CEO. You've got to go in there and say, I need you to do this, and you do this, and you do this, and even take things on yourself that you normally wouldn't do. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, I don't even have a team. You've got to be super directed about your effort. You don't have the time to get everybody up to speed or everybody on the same page. You've got to go in there and really do. Okay. Next, all of your effort has to be about the execution of your plan, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it can't be about the emotion of what if, right? When you're talking about all the things that can happen, when you think about my example of Applebee's, I have $1 million, I need 10. If I think about that long enough, right? What's the result? Like, you're like, maybe you just stare at the ceiling at night. I mean, the point is that you've got to get stuff done, and the things that you're going to get done, which we're going to talk about, these things that go into your plan, you've got to be able to be creative. You've got to be energetic. And every second that you spend not executing a plan is your failure as a leader, as hard as that is, right? To really do the things that make a difference. But if you're like, what if, right? Of course you have to consider things, but it can't be about the emotion of it. And this is hard. These are our babies. These are, right? These are things that we've built for years. And we're like, oh my God, I can't do what we were doing. Or I spent all this time doing this and now I have to undo it. Whatever that may be, it doesn't matter, right? Your job is not to be emotional about it. Your job is to build it into executing. Okay. Next, there's a lot of chaos for entrepreneurs prior to COVID. Now that's even more so the case because you don't have all the resources you need and you've got to cut staff and you've got to make changes, right? You've got to have a process to manage your plan. Okay. What does that process mean? That means that, okay, once a week, you sit down with your team. Once a week, you sit down with your advisors. Once a week, you sit down with your board. Once a week, you sit down with your interns. It could be once a week, once a day, whatever it is. That process, which people in corporate America do all the time, but we tend not to do as rigorously as entrepreneurs. You have to have that process. You have to know that it's not, I randomly talk to my advisors now. Now it's, I've got 4 advisors. I need your help because I don't have all the resources I need. So I'm going to have a weekly meeting with my advisors where each week we're going to come back and say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. Okay. Part of the execution of that plan, in which we're going to talk about what that plan, this amorphous plan, needs to have has to be your manic focus on the things you've decided you're going to do, and frankly, the things you've decided not to do. How many of us on this call are saying to ourselves, oh man, I was 3/4 of the way through my new website and I can't do that now, or I was about to launch a new product and I can't do that now, whatever it is. You've got to have real manic focus on the things you've decided to do. And a lot of times when we chase shiny toys, right, which we do as entrepreneurs, we've got to cut all that out, because remember, one of the things we're going to talk about for a good amount here is revenue. Like, how do you rework your revenue? That's going to require a lot of your best thought, right? And you can't allow your focus to get away from the things you decide to do, and stay away from the things you've decided not to do. And then finally is that this is hard stuff. I used to say all the time back in 2008, I probably get kicked between the legs about 10 times a day. I just stopped noticing, right? And I'm sure many of you are out there and your heads are spinning and you're saying, what's if? And you're like, or what if? And you're like, well, can I go back and open my restaurant? Can I go back and do, like, there's so many things going on. You have to have a release every single day. Your release can be different for you. For me, it was always going to the gym and sweating. For you, it can be yoga, it can be meditating, it can be spending time with your children, it can be going, watching a movie, whatever it is, you've got to have one of those every single day, right? Because your brain's going to be on overdrive. I can tell you, in addition to, sweating and working out, for me, one of the things that helped me the most was in the middle of all this stuff happening. I live in New York City, and my brother asked me, he's like, hey, can you watch our kids? My niece and nephew at the time were 5 and 3. And I said what most entrepreneurs would say, I don't have time to watch the kids. The world's collapsing. He's like, I really need you to. So I went over and did it. I'll never forget it. It was from 3 to 4 on a Saturday. And I went over there and the world's spinning and I'm thinking about all these things. My company's collapsing. And I watched this 5-year-old and their 3-year-old who could not care less about my balance sheet or my gift card problem. And just watching them and being with them completely took the air out. And I was like, I want to do that every week. Right. And you need that ability to take the air out. The other thing you need as part of your release is you have to be able to sleep, right? What do you think people said to me back in the day? They're like, Michael, you need to sleep more. I was working 20 hours a day for years. And I said, what most entrepreneurs would say is, I can't sleep. My company's collapsing, right? But that's a flaw. That's like basically not doing product development well, or not doing marketing well, right? So how did I learn this? I didn't have some epiphany. I, by mistake, fell asleep on my couch in my office for 20 minutes one day at like 4:30 in the afternoon. And I felt so much better. And I'm like, this is not the opposite of being an entrepreneur. This is being a good entrepreneur. So what did I do? Every single day, I would take a nap for a half hour. And once a week, I would make sure I got 8 hours of sleep, right? For me, I picked Wednesday. I slept from 10 to 6 and I felt so much better. So these perspectives, before we get into the techniques, these are the foundations of you being successful. So let's get into some of the tools. Okay, let's talk about revenue. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to pivot. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to go online, right? Which everybody's doing, because what happens? Everybody's going online. So everybody's going online. It's going to create even more competition, even more price pressure, which we all understand. And there's a lot of you that have businesses that you probably have, through your own creativity, really shifted online and are doing okay. But just remember that it's going to be an even more competitive world that existed after COVID than existed before. And a lot of us were like, wow, it's really competitive before. Like, is there any business that we started where you're like, nobody does that, right? I mean, we all have some of that, right? But it's going to be super competitive. So these are the things that I want us all to think about with respect to revenue. These are some things we learned in 2008, and I think some things that we've learned, since then that hopefully will be helpful to set you up for not just today, but for the future. Customers, whether they're existing customers or new customers that you're going after, which are obviously hard to get in this environment, you always must do more than they ask before they ask. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're a marketing services firm, and you're going to pitch Staples, and you said, Staples, I want to be your marketing firm. Or you're pitching a smaller company and you want to be their marketing firm. There's a couple different ways you can do that, right? You could say, here's my presentation, and I put my logo on top of it and I send it, or your logo on it, and I send it to you. Number two is I do a little bit of research and I get to know you a little bit and I send a little of that insight to you. And number three is I do a deep dive. I look at your competitive set. I look at what I believe your challenges are, and I give that all to you and say, this is what we think you should do. We probably don't know enough, right? But these are our insights, okay? If you're not doing more than they ask before they ask, it is going to be impossible to win business, okay? And that just doesn't apply to your service, right? This is where the creativity comes in. This applies to their business challenges. If you're just thinking about the role you play, right, to deliver your service, you're not really thinking about your customer. We had an accounting firm that we were working with, and accounting firms are getting pressured like everybody else, right? And you say, okay, how do you engage with customers? They're cutting our fees. Well, at the time is when all the PPP loans were coming out, and we're like, why don't you help them with their PPP loans? And they're like, we don't do that. You're like, why not? And don't even charge them. Just say to them, we'll help you, right? Because you have to do more than they ask before they ask. Anybody can come to the table and say, will you do this for me after somebody comes to you, right? But don't just think about the stuff you're doing, your service. Think about what makes them successful, okay? That's number one. There are 3 techniques that we think are incredibly important. The next 3 we're going to share based on the following premise. Pre-COVID, it was incredibly competitive. Post-COVID, even more so. There will be 10 people doing what one person was doing before. There will be 10 brands selling what one brand was selling before. There will be 10 restaurants chasing the same one customer, okay? And pre-COVID, we all believed that we could get almost everything for free, right? Not completely true, but a lot of things you perceive that you could get almost for free, right? Post-COVID, that's certainly the case. Okay, if I right now wanted to get a new Mercedes, I could probably go online and write a note saying, I want a Mercedes for 2 months that I want to test drive. And Mercedes might say, yep, give it a shot and not pay $1, okay? So when that is the reality, these 3 techniques are super important. Number one, we call this finding a playground where nobody else is playing, right? Remember, you have less capital, you have less resources. If you just go where everybody else is, you have very little chance of success, okay? And it can't just be, here is my, what you've all heard, unique selling proposition. Let me ask everybody on the call this. What does it get you to pay attention to something? It takes a lot. Are you ever sitting down and comparing number 1 versus number 2 versus number 3 before you even care? I mean, when you go into buy a car, do you go to the glove compartment and open up the manual? I mean, we all have clutter in our brains every single day. Like, we're not paying attention to these things. So if you're just lining up and saying, here's how ours is a little better, it's very difficult. So for example, the analogy we like to use all the time is, let's say you were dropped here from Mars, right? And you were going to start, I'll use my analogy before, an accounting firm, right? What would you put on your website? You'd say great service, you'd say great prices, we'd say our customers love us, and you'd say nobody knows more about accounting than us. Okay, but isn't that every single accounting firm, right? Is somebody going to pay attention to that messaging versus another? But it's not just messaging. It's not just unique selling proposition. You actually have to find a playground where nobody else is playing. And I'll give you an example. In my old world, rewarding people for being healthy, when we started, the average American was enrolled in 27 reward programs, right? Airline, hotel, credit card, book, Macy's, whatever. All we did was apply it to healthcare, right? Very much the same solution. The companies that run those loyalty programs are the things that you get on your credit card and your airline are some of the biggest companies in the world. They're multi-billion-dollar technology companies, right? All we did was apply it to a playground where nobody else is playing, okay? Once you do that, you define the rules, right? You define the pricing, you define the criteria that people should buy in, right? And when you do that, it becomes harder and harder and harder when you stake that claim for people to follow you because they're trying to compete on your turf, okay? Think about Starbucks when Starbucks started. When you really think about Starbucks, it's a really silly idea. This is the premise, right? There's like let's say where I live in New York City, there's coffee everywhere, right? Pre-Starbucks, it costs $2. It's pretty good. And we're going to take real estate and we're going to plop it on every corner. It costs billions of dollars to do. And what if nobody buys coffee? Not only does it not work, but we're stuck with billions of dollars of real estate. You're like, huh? When you think about that seems dumb. But what did Starbucks do? Right? Starbucks created a community. They said, remember back in the beginning, come here. Don't even buy coffee. It's a little different now, but right? Just hang out. Have your business meetings here. They found a playground where nobody else is playing. If any of you remember the stories of McDonald's used to make the chairs uncomfortable so people would leave quicker. Starbucks create a playground where nobody else is playing, okay? Finding this playground is not the easiest thing in the world. It could be a market segment, it could be a pocket, it could be approach. But I can tell you this, if you don't find your playground where you define the rules and you define the pricing, it will become incredibly difficult to compete in a post-COVID environment, okay? Next, define success by a criteria you win, okay? If you're defining success by a criteria where everybody else already buys, remember, we have less capital and less resources, right? We have to pick a criteria we win, and that criteria, as crazy as this sounds, doesn't even necessarily have to be a criteria that customers use to buy your things. And I'll give you the best example that I've ever heard. About 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, there was an ad. I encourage you to look it up. It's a Budweiser ad. And it's a medieval times scene, and a bunch of guards on a chariot kind of gallop up to the Budweiser castle, and they knock on the door, and the sentry comes out with a sword and says, "What can I do for you?" And the guys on the chariot say, "We're here to deliver your corn syrup." And the sentry says, "Well, you must be mistaken. We at Budweiser don't use corn syrup. You should go down the road to Miller's Light and Coors Light because they use corn syrup." Now, did any of you ever even know beer had corn syrup? I didn't. Did any of you ever buy or not buy beer because it had corn syrup? I certainly didn't. So all Budweiser did in a highly competitive industry, domestic beer, where it costs $100 million just to be on the ride, they picked a criteria they won, right? What happened the next day? The next day, Miller Lite and Coors Light sue Budweiser over the claim about corn syrup, which probably was exactly what Budweiser wanted, because now all of a sudden corn syrup, which nobody ever cared about before, was a criteria they won by, and now everybody is talking about. Okay? Pick a criteria where you win, right? And that will always allow you to stand out from everything else. And then finally, and this is incredibly important, is knowledge, right? You have to be able to show a knowledge that when somebody sits across the table from you, figuratively, whether it's interacting with a website or digitally or eventually face-to-face, they have to go, I need that. If I don't have that knowledge, I fail. I will experience some great pleasure or some great pain if I do that. And I will tell you a great story. My cousin David became mayor of Miami Beach. About a month before the election, he wasn't running. The person from his party came to him and said, "Listen, we just had a scandal with our candidate, and we need a new candidate, and you're going to get killed because you're going up against a very influential, well-funded state senator, but it'll be good for your name and it'll get your name out there." And he said, fine. And so they have the first debate, and the polls say 50% the other person and 10% David. And David says, "Listen, I grew up in Miami Beach. I've been here my whole life. The only thing I can tell you is there's a pothole on 5th and Collins. Collins is the main drag in Miami Beach. And I'm going to fix the pothole." And they went over to the state senator, who was very well funded and financed, and she gave a very politically correct answer and said, "Not only am I going to fix the pothole on 5th and Collins, we're going to fix every pothole across all of Miami Beach." And they went back to my cousin and said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "There is no pothole on 5th and Collins." Next day, the polls were 50-50, and he ended up winning. Okay? You can't just come to the table and say, "I'm a good accounting firm and this and this and this." You've got to come with a know-how We've all been on the other side of that, where that person goes, oh, wow, I got to have that. And you have those things. Like, you just have to call them out and you have to lead with them. If you come from Saturn and just put your bullet points on your website, it doesn't work. Okay. These 3 techniques: finding your playground, defining success by a criteria you win, and knowledge, will beat any level of competition. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, like when I walk away, I'm like, that guy got to be my mayor because he knows and she doesn't. Okay. Find that for yourself. Okay. And don't let it be just what everybody else is saying. And then finally, on the revenue side, what you do for customers now will make a difference. If you give them free things, if you help them solve their business problems, not just the problems that your service solves, they will remember. I can tell you that some of my most long-standing customer relationships are because of what happened in 2008, right? Helping people with their challenges, right? Not just their challenges relative to you, makes a difference, because everybody knows everybody's under pressure, right? And everybody knows everybody's struggling. When you go that extra mile in the middle of a crisis, these will be people that will set you up to thrive, because they will be customers for life. Okay, that's a lot. I know it's about revenue, but let's kind of move on to the next one and talk a little bit about expenses. Okay, you almost have to have the perspective, not everybody, that what would you have to do if expenses had to go to 0, right? That's not always the case, but if you ask any restaurant owner, right, or social media consultant that had a bunch of clients and clients called up and said, we can't do it. I mean, that's the way it feels at times. And you have to be able to kind of digest through that. So what does that mean? Number one, you should be negotiating with every single vendor, right? Across the board. Everybody who you pay, you should sit down and make a list and go, I'm going to have a conversation with every single one of them. Now, you have a little bit of leverage, right? Because all of these vendors want to keep you. Now, that doesn't mean they're always going to give you a break, but you should not let a dollar go out the door until you have a conversation with every single one of your vendors and say, I need free things. I need you to spread things out, right? You take advantage of your financing options. You know, before I paid $6,000 for insurance and I paid it back up front, and now I need to spread it over 12 months. Okay. Every single vendor, your landlord, right? Your bank. On the personal side, you know, many banks are letting you have 3 months of deferral on your mortgage, on your credit card. They're letting you defer credit card payments. You have to think about, how do I get this to 0? Okay. Negotiate with every single vendor, right? Does that mean legal agreements don't make sense or don't matter? Of course not, but we're in dramatic times. Okay. Next, one of the toughest thing to do is we've got to deal with employees, right? There is a reality, right, that we've got to reduce our costs. First and foremost, I'm going to talk about the techniques, but we have to remember these are human beings, right? And we have to really empathize and understand what these conversations can do. But as the business leader, we have to make these tough choices, right? And one of those tough choices is restructuring compensation. A lot of compensation now is, okay, I get a base salary and there's a 10% bonus. That compensation has to be restructured, if you can keep them, right? To be as close to how it impacts cash, not just revenue, but how it impacts cash as it can. So take, for example, a consulting firm or a law firm that pays a lawyer $100,000 a year and bills them out at a certain amount per hour, right? You might have to change that to say to the lawyer, you're going to get paid a base salary of $50,000, and then for every hour you bill, you'll make an additional piece back. Okay. Compensation has got to be restructured. And so it aligns to when you get cash in the door. Sometimes it's not as easy as what I just said. If you're in marketing, right? Some marketing obviously is directly aligned to revenue, right? Some's a little further away. In those cases, you have to restructure compensation so it's tied to the specific results that you need. So we always want, employees tied to results, but that before might look like, $100,000 salary and a $15,000 bonus. Now that has to look like a $50,000 salary and a 50% bonus if we're able to hit our objectives. Okay. We've got to restructure these expenses. There's other ways to do it. You combine jobs, there's different things you can do, but restructuring employee compensation is super, super important. Next, be creative on getting resources. Think of it this way. Before the crisis, right, we had 100 man hours we needed. right? And we paid 75 for it. Now we have, let's say 75 man hours we needed. We don't have as much, but we have to pay 50. How do we do that, right? You've got to be creative. How do you be creative? Number one, take advantage of your whole resource pool. How do you use your advisors? How do you use your board of directors? How do you use friends and colleagues, right? How do you set yourself up with interns, right? Think about how many really talented college kids and MBA students don't have their internships for the summer that are really ready, willing, and able to try to help people. One of the things we did at Lonely Entrepreneur is our free entrepreneur survival guide. We have interns that are getting out in the hands of entrepreneurs to try to help, right? So you've got to be super, super creative about taking advantage of resources, okay? Now, part of this is just survival. Part of this is I negotiate with my vendor because I don't have the cash to pay today, okay? But part of this is setting yourself up for the future, right? What does that mean? Number one, if I go back to my social media consultant and negotiate with them, and I cut my costs from $4,000 a month to $2,000 a month, okay, now I've got that lower cost structure for the future, right? If I've got my employees that are more aligned to results, I'm setting myself up for the future, right? If I'm going out there and I'm supplementing my existing resources with interns and using my advisors more effectively and using my board directors more effectively, I'm setting myself up for the future where if before I had, $100 in revenue and $75 in expense, well, maybe now I have $60 in revenue, but my expenses are 50, right? Or maybe 40 or maybe 30, and I might make the same 25, okay? So how do we set ourselves up for the future? Okay, next. Next slide. There's a lot that goes into what we're talking about here. And I do not in any way, shape, or form, from somebody that sat in your shoes, think that it's easy. And when we talk about this plan that I've talked about and some of these components, we always say it's about cash. Do I have cash? How do I get cash? Of course, but what are the things that affect cash? Certainly, Paycheck Protection Program and loans and all those things are things that we've done in survival, and everybody's heard a lot about getting those and using those, and those of course are super important. But the things in this plan, cash, of course, but then revenue and expenses are the things that impact cash, right? How do I deal with revenue, right? What are the things and the techniques that I have to do as part of that plan? How do I deal with expenses in a way that I can reduce my expenses down to a level where I can still make money in a changing world, right? And also, how do I deal with myself? Like, how do I feel comfortable, right? How do I feel okay? How do I feel energetic enough to take on the challenges of all these different things? Because when you really think about this plan, right, it's existing cash, new cash, revenue, expenses, employees, communicating with everybody, making sure I'm okay, right? Like, it's a lot. It's legitimately a lot. And so that really goes back to some of those fundamental kind of perspectives that we talked about. Number one, there's always a way. Number two, you have to focus your effort on execution and not emotion. Okay. All the things I'm talking about here is we all go, okay, I can do that. And then you're like, well, how do I do that? And how do I have the time to do that? And all that stuff. And then finally, and not least importantly, is the ability to have a release. Here's the way I would say it to you. You have to perform at your best. I bet you thought pre-COVID, every day you went to bed and went, wow, I'm performing at a high level. Or maybe you didn't think I was performing at a high level, but certainly trying really hard at it. Now, you have to be at your best. So having a release, the answer isn't, I don't have time to sleep. The answer is I have to be at my best. We worked 20 hours a day for 3 years, right? And it worked out okay, but we had to be at our best. Having your release and taking care of yourself is no more or less important than product development or marketing or sale. So anyway, a ton to digest. Would be happy to take questions. Also, thank you to Staples. There's a special offer for everybody at the end of this. And of course, the Entrepreneur Survival Guide is free to everybody. We've got a learning community, which is this kind of one-stop shop for knowledge that everybody will be able to take advantage of. Just go to lonelyentrepreneur.com and use the code Staples if you'd like to take advantage of it. But there's also the free Entrepreneur Survival Guide. So That being said, happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. That's a ton of great stuff, insights, a lot of good stuff to think about. There are a few questions starting to come in, but yeah, I just want to pause and make sure everybody has the link to submit a question. We still have a few minutes left to do that, so you can scan this QR code or use the link in the broadcast invite from Eventbrite. But getting to our first question, actually kind of touching on one of the last things you just mentioned in your wrap up. You did mention a lot of things today. How do businesses even start to prioritize? And if you could help somebody, what would you have them start with?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, okay, what does it mean to have a plan? Because as you can probably tell, it's like you can't address one piece of it. You have to address it all. So, okay, what is a plan, right? A plan is, it's what do I do with existing cash, right? How do I get new cash? Paycheck protection program. And then those other pieces, revenue, expense, employees, and to a certain extent, taking care of yourself. What you have to do across all that is you have to decide the things you can't do, right? There's a bunch of stuff that's on the list that are nice to haves, right? You literally have to say, when I'm in survival mode, right, I've got to boil it down to its bare necessity, right? And it's not a matter of what you do first or second. Certainly, your first thing you do is, okay, look at cash. Right? And say, okay, I'm going to negotiate with all my vendors and I'm going to kind of batten down the hatches and I'm not going to send any dollars out the door until I take stake. But then secondly, it's okay, I got to get everything non-essential off my plate. That thing I was chasing, the idea I was chasing, the new marketing program I was doing, the new product I was launching. And that's not to say we're not going to do this, but that's not our job right now. Our job is to survive first. And then it's that process to manage the plan. It's, how do I get revenue moving? I need to manage to that. How do I make a list of my vendors and go down each and every one and talk to each one of them and negotiate with them? How do I look at my employees? And so, it would be great if you could say, just prioritize one thing. But you've got to be able to take things off of your plate and get down to the bare bones of each of those pieces of your plan. Tough stuff.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. It helps to kind of at least make it a little less overwhelming when you can boil it down to the essentials. So thank you for that. Let's see, another question. What about so you talked about the process for execution. Any suggestions to keep myself accountable as a team of one? So this person, it sounds like he's just the solo entrepreneur. How do they stay accountable?
It's a great question, because people all the time, like when you guys work at Staples, right? You work for a big company, and I know you guys are super entrepreneurial, but like you have check-ins and you have meetings and when you have to show up to, and when you're performance managed, and there's a discipline to it that when we become entrepreneurs, we forget all that, right? So if it's just you, right, create process for yourself. Say, if I'm going to call on new customers, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that from Tuesday from 10 to 11 and put it in your calendar. Right? It sounds silly, but do it. When you have a couple of advisors, right? Have your advisory meeting the same time every single week, right? The other couple of things that you can do, which we didn't spend a lot of time on here, but which matter, is there's a discipline to the way you work, right? So what does that mean? That means do the hardest thing first thing in the morning, right? The thing you really need your gray matter for, like 10 o'clock at night, doesn't work, okay? Secondly, put your phone on the other side of the room, turn off your email, right? How many times when we first start a business, like we want to be noticed. We want an email, somebody writing back to you, say, please, 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 right? It could be an email, offering you $1 million from Africa, all those emails everybody gets, right? And you'd be like, oh, at least somebody's talking to me. That's a lack of discipline. Shut down your email and focus on doing your things. And then finally, there's a great scene in the movie Apollo 13 where, if you remember the movie with Tom Hanks, the spaceship is damaged and they're coming back into the atmosphere, and Tom Hanks and Kevin Bacon and the other co-pilot are working on all these things, right? And Kevin Bacon goes, well, what if this goes wrong? And 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 Tom Hanks says, we need 1,000 things to go right in order, right? We're on number 7, work the problem, okay? You need to have the discipline to come to work every day. And the 5 things you've decided to do that day, don't worry about the 95 you're not doing, right? Because you certainly aren't going to get, by worrying about it, you're certainly not going to get to the 95, and then you're not going to do the 5. So create process for yourself. Create, be disciplined about how you manage your time and your day, and don't worry about the 95 you're not doing. Pick 5, leave space for number 6 that always comes up. But get those done. And then you go to bed at night going, I feel like I'm making progress towards this plan.
Awesome. Okay, here's another one. How do you properly align resources to company goals when everyone is stressed out? That's a good question.
Yeah. I think it starts with communication that has 2 main things to it, and that's candor and empathy, right? You go and you sit down your team and you say, here's the thing. We're human beings, right? We're affected by this personally and professionally. We're stuck at home in many places throughout the country. That's the reality that we live in, okay? But then there's a but, right? And the but is, listen, we've got to be able to perform at our best as a group, right? Because we have less resources, we have stresses, we have things like that. And those are the people, when you have that dialogue and you stare people in the face and say, are you in? Are you in? If you're not in, we can't have you here. Like, everybody's got to be rowing in the same direction. So these are human beings, and you have to do that with empathy. And you have to really engage people that way. Now, I also would say that some of the process we're talking about here, you can use. One of the things that a lot of times we're recommending is have a daily 15-minute check-in with your team, right? Like, I know for Lonely Entrepreneur, we have people all over the place. We have a daily check-in. We end up laughing the whole time. Even though times are super serious, even though whatever it may be, right? People still show up with their crazy screen backgrounds, and your job as the leader is to be candid and be empathetic, but also to check in a way, but in an organized way that makes people say, come on, guys, we gotta do this. And we're going through really hard times, and we understand that, and you're all affected, but everybody here has got to be rowing at their best.
Great. Okay, here's another one. Tough question. It says, what if the headwinds are just too much? How do you know when it's time to give up and cut your losses?
Yeah. Great question, and one that entrepreneurs struggle with, all the time, even prior to it, prior to COVID. I think more so than anything, what it ultimately comes down to is, do you believe what you do is solving some real challenge for a business or an individual? It's not about what you're doing today or is it really solving it? And it can't be your opinion, right? Go to somebody that you know that doesn't have your last name, doesn't live in the same house, isn't your best friend, who are all biased. Go to an intelligent business colleague that doesn't work with you, whose judgment you respect, and say to them, what do you think? Right? What do you think about what I do? Does it have value to the world, to consumers or businesses? Think about my old business, rewarding people for being healthy. We believed, right, that was going to be a critical part of the world, and went through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to be able to get it there. So if your folks say yes, if they say no, then I think that's when it doesn't matter headwinds or not headwinds, then you shouldn't be doing it, okay? If they say yes, most of the time, 99 times out of 100, it's not an absolute yes. It's yes if, right? Yes, if I find my playground, right? Where I'm the only one playing. Yes, if, right? Like, so a lot of times, think of it this way. We all use the same social media tools. We all use the same marketing. We're all doing webinars like this. Why does somebody win? Why does one place win and the exact same business doesn't win? So if you validated with somebody independent that you bring value to the table, and they might say no. Most of the time is, yes, I do, but I can't just do what everybody else does. I can't just show up and follow. I've got to be able to come to the table where they go, huh, they're different. How many services are out there now where before they were out there, right? They go, how do we ever deal with that? Like, think about even Staples. Staples' effort, as you guys all know, is we're rolling out the amazing things in stores, and they have the ability to go in there and do podcasting. It's brilliant. Because what do all entrepreneurs suffer with? Like, I want to do a podcast, but I don't have the microphone and the thing. Like, is that it's brilliantly simplistic. But the point is that it's most of the time it's yes if you get to finding your playground where nobody else is playing.
Thanks for the plug and the podcasting, one of our new services. But no, that's awesome. Great advice. I don't know if we can put the QR code up one more time. I know we're at the last few minutes here. So last call for questions. Get those in. I will ask you one more. So COVID is exposing things that are wrong with society in ways that will impact industries and markets like real estate going forward. What trend spotters do you recommend following to identify mega trends and market opportunities?
Yeah, really true. And obviously the tragedies that are happening with Black Lives Matter, and that as well is also fundamentally shifting the way we think about all kinds of different things. I think that a lot of times the independent judgment that we have as entrepreneurs is the best judgment out there, right? So when you think about the people that are looking at different places, what you really have to say to yourself and take a step back and challenge your most talented friends and colleagues to think about is, okay, what is the world going to buy and need after this, right? And you say, okay, well, I'm a home builder. Well, that's going to be hard because are people going to buy homes? Well, but doesn't everybody need a better home office, right? Or I had a childcare facility, right? And you know, I'm in the suburbs of Boston, and I've got kids that go to my childcare every day, and they're not going to be able to go there anymore. So, but there's so many people that are going to be at home with their children for a while, right? Could I create a service where we do it at home? Like, not all these ideas are the best ideas, but the point is that think about what the world's going to need after, right? And that to me is what dictates the trends. And those are going to be very, very, different things. Think about it. If we have so many people unemployed, the world's going to need vocational schools, right? To teach people skills that can't afford to go to college if, So I'm rattling things off, but just think about what the world needs as the trends. And that is where money will go, services will go, capital will go to try to solve those problems.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. And this question is, how do you motivate yourself or your team to stay focused and give their best? I mean, I guess we've been at this in this COVID crisis for a few months now, so it's a good question. How do you stay motivated?
The way I think about defining resilience, right, which is really requires resilience, is actually progress against your plan. It's nothing succeeds like success. When you get that cash win, you're like, cool. When you get that expense win, you're like, cool. Like, that's what does it. It conceptually staring at the ceiling, I acted, I got more money, I put out less money, I got a customer, I reduced an expense. Like, that is ultimately, it's that success that to me creates resilience. You can be tough, but if you slam your head against the wall enough time, that stops at some point. So that's why get to the plan, focus all your effort on the plan. And when you get those wins, you're like, I can do this. And we're all entrepreneurs. We can do this. It's just that right now it's particularly challenging.
Okay. Well, I can think of no better way to wrap on that kind of motivational note. So I just want to thank you, Michael, so much for your time, your perspective, your insights, super valuable. Thank you to everybody who joined us today on the webinar, who asked your questions and spent time with us. We will follow up with the recording of the session, so if you missed any of it, you can expect to see that. I just want to mention again, we saw the special offer that Michael shared with us earlier, so don't forget 30% off in the learning community using the code STAPLE. So thank you for that, Michael. Appreciate that special offer for our viewers today, as well as the survival guide, which is available every day at Lonely Entrepreneur. So on that note, thanks again to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.